right, so hi everybody, this is T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to finish up our discussion on 7 deadly sins and 7 heavenly virtues. I stumbled across a couple of things while I was dealing with my little side effects of the COVID vaccination that I thought, how interesting would this be to share with you guys? And so I'm going to slide something onto the screen for just a second. Now that I'm saying that, you would think I would have had it handy, but let me open it up as large as I can. Now, I don't know where this came from. Honestly, I just saw this somewhere and I thought, well, this could be fun to just discuss. So somebody, I don't know who, took the 7 deadly sins and their opposites and defined them in terms of metrics about the population of the United States and patterns in the United States to see if they could figure out where do these 7 deadly sins tend to reside. And so now they define, can you guys see this well enough what I'm showing you? Is it, I can zoom in more, but it's going to get a little grainy.
Yes.
Yeah, see that well enough. So greed, they defined as the average income compared with the number of people living below the poverty line. And so the darker the color, the more greed there is. And this opposite color range, the darker the shade of, I guess, gold. Is that right? Am I reading that correctly? The more saintly you are. So it's very interesting that greed would be, well, California, that's Arizona, up here in the Pacific Northwest, the Eastern Seaboard, the whole kind of Midwest centered around like Detroit, Chicago, that kind of area, and Florida. And I guess that's Houston, Texas. Maybe that's Houston and Dallas. So, and then these darker areas, which is kind of like, well, we would describe more like the Bible Belt, but there's Atlanta. These are a lot of the states that we don't know much about. West Virginia, there's Kentucky, and then here you are out there in the Dakotas and going straight down the Rockies, I guess. Nah, it's still east of the Rockies. So isn't that interesting? What do you guys think about defining greed as your average income compared with the number of people living below the poverty line?
It's fascinating. It's the gap.
Yeah, it's the gap. Yeah. Other thoughts, anybody?
I'm not good with that though. I mean, I think that, industry, creates a lot of that.
Yeah. And so that's where you go back then, is the greed really about the people or is it about corporations? Because when I look at these areas, I got to believe the majority of the Fortune 500 companies are probably in those red areas. I mean, I know there's a bunch in Georgia that's not really showing up. That saintly area would actually include, would that include Atlanta, or is Atlanta in northern Georgia? I never know, where is Atlanta? Anyway, so, but I would have thought that greed is more about the accumulation of wealth beyond what is really necessary to live a decent lifestyle. Maybe what they're saying poverty line.
Maybe also cost of other people to add it.
Well, that's certainly true. And did they factor in the cost of living? Because these areas that are shown in the darker red probably also have a higher cost of living.
They probably do, but I'm thinking about like the populace of Florida. I lived in Florida for 15 years, and you have a wealth of seniors in Florida.
Yeah, but a very interesting study was just published, and if you guys want it, I'll see if I can dig it up and show it to you. But it was showing what areas of the country, specifically what zip codes in the country have the highest rating for credit. So based on overall credit scores. The number one is Sun City, Florida. Not Sun City, Florida, the Villages in Florida.
Yeah.
They have the highest, whatever that number is called. What is that number called? FICO?
Yes.
Yeah,
Sure.
whatever that is. The second highest is Sun City West. So we were rather surprised, but we were like, no, we happen to have out of these, I think it was 2,550 zip codes they looked at. We have the second highest FICO score in the nation.
But those are
And
people who, you know, they retired, they worked a long time. The villages at one point was building like over 400 homes a month.
yeah, yep. And these are people who they do tend to be retired. They do tend to have very little debt. And so maybe that's why their credit score is so high, because
Mhm.
any bank would go like, oh, please let us give you money for something. But,
Mhm.
you know, nobody really, you know, you got it by the time you've retired here, because a lot of people that end up in the villages or end up in any of the Sun City communities, they already did the big house and then
Mhm.
they scaled down, which means they probably bought their house outright.
Right,
And
right.
so, you know, so it's stuff like that. So I thought that was interesting. But anyway, that's where greed would kind of be. That being said, I found this on another one, but I couldn't find a good diagram to show to you. The opposite of greed, if you guys remembered, was charity. And wait, is that right? Wait, let me make sure I'm saying the right thing. Was the opposite of greed chastity? Wait. The opposite of greed, no, is charity.
Charity.
And so when they looked also across the country at the highest areas of charitable giving, it mapped to these areas that are showing the highest level of greed. So to me, greed was about holding on to your money. But if you're taking whatever that excess income is and that turns you into more of a charitable giver, then that should be factored in somewhere to balance this all out. Yep. Okay, other thoughts, comments about greed? All righty. Envy. Now they're saying envy could be measured based on total theft, robbery, burglary, larceny, and grand theft auto per capita. I've never really known the differences between robbery, burglary, and larceny. Any of you guys have a police background to tell us the differences there? One probably involves a weapon. I have no idea. No idea.
Larceny is more white collar.
Oh, okay, fine. So nobody broke into anything or holding a weapon, but
Burglary is not against another person. That's just stealing.
oh, fine. It's a crime against property as a crime against
Robbery is a crime against a person.
a person. Okay, fine. And then grand theft auto, I know that means $10,000 or more of value being stolen or whatever.
I would just love to comment here. I
Please do.
think that, I mean, I'm really curious how they measured this,
Yeah.
but I look at this and think, how much of this has to do with people's incomes
Mm-hmm.
and where the income disparities are? You know, because a lot of theft, I mean, some of it is just because these are bad people, but a lot of it has to do with poverty.
Right. Exactly.
And so how much of this reflects poverty versus the actual intent of hurting people, of theft?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good observation. And the other thing is like when I see this dark gold swath between the Dakotas and down through the upper Midwest, and there's Kentucky, and they're being depicted as being rather angelic. Meanwhile, Kentucky continues to be the country's epicenter for methamphetamine production. So I think that's all very curious. So I would like to know where a lot of this comes from. And LA escaped the whole robbery, burglary, larceny, and grand theft auto. You would have thought that'd be like a hot spot, but this is more Bay Area of that. Yeah. Anyway, just thought it was interesting. Okay, wrath. The number of violent crimes, murder, assault, and rape per capita. Now, other than Detroit, it would seem that this whole Midwest, including Chicago itself, I thought Chicago had one of the highest murder rates, you know, historically in the country.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
the Washington D.C. area as well it used to be at one point was murder capital of America, from what I
Yeah,
understand.
well, and Detroit earned it for a couple of years, I know, when I lived there. Well, so that's it. I moved away and the murder rate went down. So don't know what
You
conclusion.
infuriate a lot of people.
I must. I must. So there you go. But and I don't get, why is everybody in Louisiana so upset? What's going on with Florida? So you know, so I get it. There's Miami. So is this really all of Florida, or is it really concentrated towards Miami and certain other
Yeah, I
sort
think they
of
used a
areas?
magic marker for coloring this in. I don't think they,
Yeah,
I don't
because
think they used a fine point pen.
yeah, because I mean, I've been to, I've spoken in every state in the U.S., so I don't know that I can say I've been there. More like I flew into their airport, took a taxi to a hotel, did a speaking engagement, and so now I can check it off the list. But why do I expect that a great deal of the Dakotas aren't even populated? So how can we be saying, you know, that they're all, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I've been to these areas. So yeah, anyway. Still, overall, the patterns are interesting. So far, you want to, if you want to go to South Carolina or most of North Carolina, including Charlotte, um, envy and wrath are waiting for you.
Mm.
Hmm, interesting. All right, let's come over here.
I'll just stay here in Detroit.
I'm saying so far, Detroit's not looking, well, it's got its own issues, doesn't it? But I happen to like living in Detroit. I thought it was a great time. Okay, sloth. Now look how they're describing sloth. Expenditures on art, entertainment, and recreation compared with the employment rate. I don't quite know what that means, but I'm a bit surprised to find out that people in Montana are spending a lot of money on art, entertainment. I thought for you to even live in Montana, you were by definition of the sturdy folk variety. So, I mean, look at that. So I don't know quite about, yeah, I don't know about this one. And all these people in Wisconsin are spending a lot of money on that sort of stuff. You would think that wherever there is great wealth, there would be expenditures. Edie, oh, let's see, did I not unmute you? Here you go. No, Edie, go ahead, chime in. You're him, yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
I was just gonna say, Jackson, Wyoming. I know my son wants to buy property there. It makes San Francisco look cheap. So there's
Oh,
a big trend of you cannot get a little cabin for less than, you know, like 5 million. It's unbelievable because so much of the land is protected as natural,
mhm.
you know,
Right,
government
right, right,
land.
government land, yeah.
Yeah. And the money, it is unbelievable because that's his dream. And it, honest to God, it makes San Francisco and New York look dirt cheap.
Yeah,
So
wow.
that's why I think the arts are there, because there's another crowd as opposed to
Yeah,
who was there 50 years ago. I just wanted to
yeah.
say that.
Interesting, interesting. And Dragon, since you're, he's joined us from the Netherlands, I don't know how much time you spent in the US, but let me give you a real quick geography lesson. So right along here is where the Mississippi River flows. The Mississippi River tends to divide the US, not perfectly, but at least, I'm going to say conceptually, traditionally, into what's the East Coast and what's the West Coast. So anything west of the Mississippi River is a very different America than anything east of the Mississippi River. And
Right.
one of the things that's very true about the United States or west of the Mississippi River is that a great percentage of the land mass is owned by the federal government. It's not in private hands. And
Mhm.
among the land that's in private hands, a great deal of that land is large agricultural livestock kinds of things. Like, I mean, there are ranches in Texas that have their own zip code. There's one ranch in Texas that has multiple exits from the freeway, and you're still on one person's private property.
Wow.
So vast amounts of land. Cows are primarily raised for dairy purposes east of the Mississippi and for beef production west of the Mississippi. And so most of the population in the United States is east of the Mississippi. I don't know if that's still true. It might have shifted over a little bit to the west as more people have moved to Texas and that. But generally speaking, there's a whole area, this whole bulky bit in the center of the US has very little population compared to the coastlines and the east side period. You guys agree with that as I gave that little, yeah?
Nope, no
Interesting. Thank you
disagreement.
very much.
Generally true. Yeah.
Yeah, generally true. And so that's why we're kind of surprised to see all this activity up here in Montana, because Montana is a very large mass of land with relatively small population. A lot of it is governmental land. Probably a lot of it is actually national parks and things like that. And a lot of it is probably large agricultural sorts of installations. But Montana is also wicked cold. It has severe winters. So, and the mountains are all running through there. So that was just surprising to see so much happening. Where I go over here to like this little dark area over here on the East Coast, that's, well, it's not New York, but what is that? New Jersey and,
That's New Jersey.
yeah,
East
New
New-
Jersey, Western, or rather Eastern Pennsylvania.
Maryland.
Yeah, Maryland. So that kind of makes sense.
In DC.
Yeah, and then down here on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, this is Louisiana. So that's where you would have, well, Baton Rouge and New Orleans, things like that.
Where is
So
Wyoming, that eating niche?
right under Montana. So this
Oh,
big
okay.
strange shape one up here is that, and then over here, this almost triangular shape one, that's Idaho. I think I can zoom in a little bit more. Yeah, this is Idaho, potato world. This is Wyoming. Then this is Utah. This is Colorado. And what am I missing in the four? This is Four Corners. So that's much further south. But yeah, that's Wyoming. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. Not a lot of land, but not a lot of people. And if you ever choose to drive through it, well, plan on being bored. So, I mean, the truth is, as you start to drive through it, you will find very great natural beauty. But after how many hours of driving through great natural beauty, does it kind of like, oh, yeah, more of that, more of that. So, yeah. Okay, gluttony. This one very much surprised me. The number of fast food restaurants per capita. So, I would have thought that Florida would have been fast food world and
Mhm.
all that. And this isn't even Houston and Dallas. This has shifted over to, now you get over here to what's over there, El Paso, Texas. This is at the border of Mexico. And I believe that's where a crossable border is from perhaps Laredo and all that. So I thought, why are there's not a lot of population there. So why is there so many fast food restaurants? And then over here you get to Western North Carolina and Western Virginia and Eastern Kentucky, Eastern Tennessee.
I just have to comment here. This again correlates with areas of deep poverty in the United States.
It's interesting, yeah, but it doesn't correspond really with great population density.
No, but why gluttony, the only thing I can say is maybe fast food restaurants are the only restaurants in those areas.
Well, that could be,
But-
there could be a food desert, right, as far as quality food
It
goes.
could be a food desert, but otherwise it makes absolutely no sense to call gluttony fast food restaurants in the first place. But those are areas of deep poverty. Not that there aren't areas of deep poverty elsewhere, but those are the areas of, I think, deepest, the Appalachian.
Right. Yeah. Now that's true. That's Appalachia. Now, the only difference or exception to what you're saying is easternmost Virginia and easternmost North Carolina. These are resort communities.
Well, in
So-
university areas.
or university areas for sure. So maybe that's also why there's some
No, it doesn't
fast
make
food
sense.
restaurants. But yeah, I just thought that's really interesting. Okay, here's a fun one. And again, I'm going to be surprised by something here, but this is lust as defined by the number of sexually transmitted disease cases per capita. Now, yeah, and I think maybe the keyword here is reported, but Now, why this surprises me is because the villages in
Yes,
Florida
exactly.
are not even, they're in the middle somewhere. The villages has the highest incident of sexually transmitted diseases in the entire country. And Dragon,
Mhm.
again, because you're not from the United States, the villages is the largest community of retired people in the country. I
Mhm.
think there's a couple of 100,000 people that live there, all over the age of 55. And it is known as being like swinger city. Singles over the age of 55 are very promiscuous, very randy. That's what they're known for. Meanwhile, for some reason, Sun City West, we happen to be the third largest such community in the country. We're just a bunch of boring folk. So, but I thought that's interesting. And then I look at here in Georgia, there's Atlanta. You get over to Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. So again, lots of poverty here, pockets of great wealth like there is anywhere across the country. There'll always be a community or five that are super wealthy. And in Michigan, it's not even, David, where would that be? Is that like Lansing?
No, that looks south of Lansing. That
South of
looks,
Lansing?
I can't tell you what that,
Because there's nobody there.
Monroe.
Monroe, but even Monroe, I thought would be okay. So for you guys who don't know the layout of Michigan, I know I'm zooming in too much. Detroit is over here. So as you move
Oh,
over to the
yeah,
west, you'll go
down and in a little bit.
you down and in,
Yeah,
yeah,
right
right,
in there.
yeah,
Right.
right there, right, kind of there.
Yep.
But as you start traveling across the state, it's about 3 hours wide by car. You'll go through Lansing, which is the capital city, and you'll end up over in Grand Rapids. Kalamazoo is down here, so there's some college towns and all that, but there's not a lot. There's not a lot going on.
And I'm proud to say I live in a non magenta area.
Yeah, there you go. So you're saying you're just not doing your part. Is that it? So
I'm just not contributing to this to the numbers. Yes.
there it is. There it is.
Mm,
I love it.
funny.
Okay. And then this last one is pride. Now, Kathy, to your point, oh, Kathy had to go to another call. Oh, pity, because she was talking about how this might attach to different pockets of poverty around the
No,
country.
it's okay. I'm
Oh,
just
you're
about
there.
to,
Okay.
but I had to stay for the last one, and then I'll be late.
Yeah.
For
Okay. Because this is the aggregate. So, and they're saying that the aggregate represents pride, which we would have defined in its more arrogant expression than just being, proud of who you are and what you're doing.
I'm sorry. I think this is ridiculous, but what I would love to see, what I would
That's
love
how
to
you
see
feel.
is is a correlation between around income.
Yeah.
I want to see, this is my parting shot on this. I want to see what the correlation is around income and income disparities in some of these areas, because anyway, but I don't get this at all. It just doesn't make sense. So anyway, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I gotta say, some of these darkest areas are right on top of Phoenix. And I am telling you, not much happens here. Just not much happens here. So all of southern Michigan. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
you moved from one magenta area to another to another.
I did. I moved from Michigan to North Carolina, dark magenta, to Phoenix. Oh my, we were considering the Pacific Northwest. No matter where we wanted to go, sin was waiting for us. There you go. Now, you could also add into this a little bit of the dimension about the Bible Belt and the Rust Belt. The Bible Belt tends to be further south than the Rust Belt. And again, Dragon, for your benefit, the Rust Belt is where all the industry developed in the US. So very heavy emphasis on iron and steel and auto production. So that's why they call this kind of northern area the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt also includes a lot of Bible Belt, which is more fundamentalist or traditional conservative religious groups tend to be more in the southern part of the United States. But so you'll often hear people describe the United States as having a Bible Belt and having a Rust Belt and things like that. So what I thought was interesting.
Bible Belt better get on track.
I'm just saying, because Kentucky, I would have thought for sure Kentucky would have been Bible Belt. But if I go down a little bit south to Tennessee, how is Tennessee suddenly like nothing? It's very weird. So I wanted to go like, does this map, first I thought like, well, goodness should map to the Bible Belt. Why is goodness mapping to the Rust Belt? And sin is mapping more to the Bible Belt kind of thing. It's really interesting just to see it all come together.
Preacher, heal thyself.
Preacher, heal thyself. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Because some of these reds are far darker than even on the West Coast. And of course, I was raised Southern Missionary Baptist, so I was raised hellfire and brimstone and preachers that are losing their breath as they're delivering the morning service and all this. And of course, California was the domain of Satan himself,
Is
And
Las Vegas on this list?
no, Vegas
Oh,
is over here. Look at Nevada, has nothing in it at all. Even though
oh, wow.
Vegas is the southernmost tip, we can drive to Vegas in about 4 hours um, from Arizona, and so you're not. Most of Nevada is government property, and that. But other than Reno, which is here, very close to the Bay Area of California, Reno would be there. Las Vegas would be very far south, and the rest of it, nobody lives there. This is all governmental land. All governmental land.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, but yeah, how did Vegas escape? Vegas, Dragon, you might know this, is Sin City.
Yeah,
Apparently not. so, so who knows? Anyway, I thought you guys might find this interesting since we were talking about the seven deadly sins and the seven heavenly virtues.
You must
Um,
have a heck of a unique browsing history, T.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. The stuff I find while looking for something else, but nevertheless, yeah. I was trying to see if there were any studies that had been done about modern populations and the incidence of these. So there you go. And Dragon, I'll do my best to find how it would map to Europe. I'll bet you could tell us. So how does this overlay on Europe? How does this overlay on the Netherlands? How does this just plain overlay?
Well, Amsterdam is purple.
Amsterdam is purple. Well, let's think about that. Actually, Amsterdam.
Was when I was there.
Yeah, well, that's true. Because I would say that probably the wealth of the Netherlands is centered around Amsterdam, Rotterdam. Where else is particularly wealthy?
well, I'm Amsterdam for sure, but I wouldn't treat Amsterdam as Holland. Amsterdam is different.
It's its own world.
It doesn't really represent. It's a nice place,
Yeah.
but it's different. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and truly, I've spent a lot of time in the Netherlands, and it's amazing how you can get to a very different Netherlands a half hour on a train.
Yeah.
So, you leave Amsterdam, go in any direction the train goes, it'll be a very different experience.
Greatest thing about Europe.
Well, that's certainly true. That's certainly true. So yeah, as you travel around, you don't need to travel for very long to end up in a very different culture,
No.
very different. It's part of the fun. Don't ever lose that. Keep it that way.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So now the other thing I just wanted to share with you guys was how this little map we put together. Let me get to the right diagram. This little map of the deadly sins and where they lay on the change grid. I thought it might be interesting to now look at the dark side of the change grid and see what kind of adjectives we find there. Edie, is your hand still, is that a new hand up, or you just didn't put your hand down, or?
I didn't touch it, so that.
Okay, fine. Well, you just chime in whenever you want to chime in. Okay, so we did talk a little bit about where each one of these seven deadly sins kind of expresses itself. And so like any kind of a word cloud, the larger the word, the more prevalent we might expect to find that. So we certainly thought that we would find lust, for example, starting a bit upgrid because the core emotion of power stress was lust, wanting something. So desire lives there, and not just wanting it, but wanting it with a bit of a sense of urgency attached to it. So really wanting it. But nevertheless, as we moved further out grid, even though we were coming a bit down grid, leaving power stress and moving more into power, that lust became even more focused because the driver energy is, well, it's driven, it wants something, it's headed towards something. And so we kind of joked and said that back before COVID or back in the day, this was behavior at the bar the hour before it closes, the hour before last call. Things become far more driven, far more directed towards that. But as you move into the outgrid danger zone, lust actually has its highest or most dramatic form of expression, but it's not necessarily lust um, as it connotes a sexual desire. It's just the wanting of power. You lust after a lot more things than sexual activity. And so we found a lot there. So I thought, well, if we look at the adjective map, look at the dark side of the adjective map, do we also see that plotting out here? And I'll zoom in a little bit. Oh, wait, what's happening? Stop moving, just get bigger. So when I was looking here, we try our best not to use the same adjective in two places. So lust was actually something that we found in power stress. So you're not going to see it on the dark side of the change grid. Remember, the dark side of the change grid is where all 4 danger zones come together. So we're only looking at those 4 little chopped off triangles and ultimately their powerless points at overlay. So I thought, well, maybe we need to take a look at the words that we have out here and go, do any of these convey that element of lust? So if you guys can see these, you can kind of look your own little look around it. Lust might have a little bit to do with being impatient, seductive. Any of these others get your eye as far as what might communicate lust well enough that we don't need to?
Conceited.
Conceited. Yeah, and certainly as we find the pride, arrogance, and all that, we're going to find that here as well. Because again, we try to use pride in a healthier spot, because when we think of pride, we try to frame it in a more positive way than they did historically.
And possessive.
Possessive. Yeah. I like that. That could do it. Manipulative.
Punitive. Yeah.
Relentless, controlling, exploitive. Is that even a word, or is it exploitative? I don't know. Exploitive. They're probably both words. Yeah. And of course, the harder you push, the more unpopular you become. Domineering, unyielding, arrogant, brutal, cruel. Now we're getting into severe behavior kinds of
What
things.
about resistant?
Resistant. Now, how does that, where's that one? Is it
A
here?
little bit on the red line.
On the red line to the
Yeah,
right?
down.
Oh,
down.
yeah. Well, see, because now you're getting closer to the downgrid part of the outgrid danger zone.
Because if you're
So,
lusting for something, you're resisting the fact that you
uh,
don't really have it, right? So it's kind of like you're forcing an issue,
yeah,
is what
well,
I was
if
thinking.
anything else, you might be resisting your giving up on your pursuit of something.
Right,
Talk about people getting hell bent on,
right.
marching blindly into hell. Wait, is that a lyric to a song? For heavenly cause. That's from Man of La Mancha. Willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So that's the idea about, there could be evidence all around you that just says this is not something you should be pursuing, but you resist that because you're so headstrong. So isn't that interesting? How does headstrong and resistant come into
Mhm.
play when someone is giving you a warning. Now, again, this red line means these adjectives all exist on a border. They could be positive, they could be negative. You're in kind of like a warning zone, warning, warning. You are entering the danger zone, but technically when it comes to being outgrid, you're not in the danger zone until you are to the left of that red line. But there's a bunch of territory on the border. And so pioneering, we would tend to frame as being kind of like a positive side of a
Mhm.
word, right? I mean, when you guys think about people being pioneering, you know, they're trying to find their way through in their little wagon to get through. But could pioneering, you know, pioneering is the cutting edge of things, the leading edge of things. Can that also be negative?
Yes.
Yeah. In our word choice, I don't know that I've ever heard anyone use the word pioneering in a negative kind of way, but that behavior could pioneer you into trouble. Can impatient be both good and bad?
Yes.
Yeah. All the rest of you talk too. You're unmuted. Do something with it.
I'm wavering on that. I'm not
Yeah.
sure that, you know, maybe there's a better word than impatience that indicates a positive longing.
Right. Well, and maybe that's it, because again, you know, this is the driver behavior set. So a little bit of impatience in a driver could be a good thing because they're trying
Yeah,
to like, I want to make it happen. Let's get
right.
going. How come everything? Come on, everybody, get on board. So that impatience, um, you almost go like, well, maybe it's a little bit healthy, because again, remember, if we are to the right of the red line, vertical red line, then we're going like, no, these are all good qualities of someone who is that fully engaged, maybe even in execution, that driven driver on a good day. That's what we're looking at. So some of these have to be that as well.
I'll give you a quick example of impatient, a weird story that came across my feed was a lady at a fast food restaurant, the Burger King, who went to the drive-through window and was impatient and decided that she was going to get revenge on them for making her wait. Literally, they have this lady on camera with a gun in her hand and her face like she's in through the drive-through window. So now they're looking for her. This happened in Murfreesboro, I guess that's how you
Murfreesboro,
pronounce it,
yep, yeah, Murphy,
Tennessee.
Tennessee, yep. Hmm.
That was impatience.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, she's in a drive-through, a fast food drive-through. I mean, which is probably fast. I don't eat that stuff, but
yeah.
I imagine it's probably faster than you cooking it. And she just was impatient and decided she was going to literally shoot at the employees because they didn't deliver her food in her timing.
Isn't it a shame? You know, where does lunacy live on the change grid?
Yeah.
No, because again, you know, thinking about this, we said that what the change grid is supposed to provide is a space for every possible expression of human behavior, human thought, human feeling, attitude, every single experience, internal, external, that a human could ever experience has to be somewhere on the change grid. That's the whole point of the change grid, is that it encompasses everything about humanity. Where does lunacy live? I
Lunacy
got,
is an
I mean,
outgrid danger zone.
outgrid danger zone. Yeah. When I think about a lunatic, now we might need someone with a with their PhD in criminal psychology. But I think lunatics were actually about outward behavior of insanity, that they would do things to themselves, to others, to animals, to people. That's why they were called a lunatic, as opposed to just using that word to describe craziness in general. I think lunacy was a special word for special reasons. So I think David's right. That would definitely be something. Now maybe I should add that right here. Let me make a little note. So let's put lunacy or lunatic. What's the adjective form?
Lunatic.
lunatic, lunatical, lunatical,
Could lunatic or lunacy be unfair?
lunacy. Well, again, I don't know. We need to really look up, I happen to have a computer right in front of me, don't I? I'm curious to know
Well, I
what
was just thinking if someone was so stressed and so out of control and didn't feel like they had any ability and way too much challenge, they might just go crazy.
right, but going crazy, okay, lunacy. No, the definition isn't really helping. It says that lunacy is the state of being a lunatic. Thank you. Insanity, madness, dementia, derangement. That's why I think we need to go to what's that book that people in the mental health field use? DM something or another,
Oh, right.
DMS3, DSM3 or whatever it is, that
Yeah.
really gives strict definitions of all of these. So I'd be curious.
And isn't that behavior, Edie might can speak to this, but isn't that kind of behavior rather unconscious?
It could be, well, in fact, listen to this one, everybody. It's amazing
From
what
the
you
instinctual level, yeah.
learn when you click on things. Where do you think the word lunacy comes from?
The moon.
The
Lunar.
moon.
Yeah.
So it was all tied to behaviors that were exacerbated during the moon. And I got to tell you, I worked in an emergency room at a hospital, and they would tell you, people would say like, oh, it's a joke. It's not true. That during the full moon, the crazies come out. I promise you, during a full moon, the crazies come out.
Yes.
So there's a lot more weird behaviors and what comes along with that. Yeah, during the full moon.
It's all lunacy.
It's all tied to the moon. Isn't that crazy?
Seems it's not in use indeed anymore. It's insanity or mental disorder.
Yeah, that's right. But it does make you wonder, where did it come from and why did they create that specific term? Usually it's because it represented a certain specific set of behaviors that other words didn't apply to. Or it didn't apply. So I was kind of, because now I think you're right. It's just kind of, now it's listed as a mental disorder, intermittent insanity, extreme foolishness, or an instance of it. So I think these are not the strict kind of diagnostic definitions I would be looking for. And just one other second, let me just go with the source here for just a second. And if I type in insanity, I want to know how many words in English do we even have that describe insanity.
It's crazy.
Yeah, there's over 80 words in common usage in English that go along with insanity. So don't know how that would work in Dutch, but I'm sure there's plenty of words for that in Dutch.
The French and Latin root for lunatic is insane. Comes from a root word meaning insane.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the Latin is moonstruck, literally.
Moonstruck, interesting. Yeah, and here the ones they're putting up here includes, well, this is an interesting one, hysteria. So hysteria is very interesting because it's where, Linda, we can't hear you, dear. You're off microphone or something. Yeah, no, can't hear you. But hysteria is where a hysterectomy as a procedure came from. They actually thought that women who weren't behaving exactly the way that men in society wanted them to behave had something very much wrong with them that needed to be dealt with surgically. And the surgery they recommended was a hysterectomy. What kind of madness was that?
Wow.
So, but yeah, hysteria. That's why they say one form of insanity is hysteria. And that's where hysterectomy comes from. The removal of hysteria.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. But wasn't that easy? If someone wouldn't behave the way you wanted them to behave, just define their behavior as being mental illness.
Mm.
Makes you wonder. In fact, who wrote that there is a fine line between insanity and genius? You know, yep. So anyway, there you go. All right, anyway. So yeah, I don't see where we have a lot of other words related to true insanity. Some of these on the in-grid side of things start to touch upon it a little bit, talk about being totally subservient, oppressed, that, but even then, I would go, what is the most withdrawn diagnosis related to insanity? What is the most expressive one? Like this would probably be mania, would be upgrid, and depression would be downgrid. And depression is downgrid. Yeah.
I have a schizophrenic would be the most withdrawn T, I think.
Schizophrenic.
I have
Yeah.
a phrenic. Yeah, they turn totally inward. Yeah,
Yeah,
they don't talk.
so not
they're mute.
schizophrenic. What was the first part of the medical?
Hebephrenic.
Hebephrenic. Hebephrenic. I'll look that one up. That'd be a fun one to put on the adjective list. Imagine all the people we certify looking at the comprehensive adjective map, kind of going like hebephrenic. Okay. Yeah, we'll show that to a client and say, if any of these resonate with you, just let us know. Well, hebephrenic definitely resonates with me. I like it. Yeah, psychotic. Where would Reynolds psychotic be? That feels very upgrade to me. Upgrade danger zone.
Yeah, well,
Because aren't I usually then seeing things and hearing things that really aren't there?
yeah.
Yeah.
Could be
Psychotic
outgrowth, yeah.
behavior. Could be outgrow. Again, they become neighbors. So maybe it
Yeah.
starts because of an upgrade response, and then I have to fight against it. Because remember, in the whole survival mechanism, if you're too far upgrade, you would want to flee. But if you can't flee, you would move outgrade and fight. So, and then we have fade and freeze as the other two possibilities. Yeah, which by the way has made me always wonder about moving frozen. So moving frozen to in-grid. Anyway, the adjective map is a living thing. And by the way, Dragon, for your benefit, if someone said translate this directly into Dutch, I would immediately say it won't be accurate. Because just like, I speak enough French to get by, there are words that we commonly use that appear in both languages. If you look at them just as a word, that word would be in both languages. For example, I'll give you one, and that is the word excite. Excite is a verb in both languages, and in the two languages, they mean dramatically different things. So if you actually are in France and you say, I'm very excited, je suis très excité, you are saying that you are like hornier than horny has ever gotten. And obviously that's not what we mean by excited when we're speaking in English. And so we'd actually have to look at how the culture uses that particular word to find where its location would be. That doesn't mean that a lot of the adjectives directly translated would not be in the same area, but there's going to always be a few that you just can't directly translate. And
I agree, and I think that one needs to be careful with words. I mean, there's an old one, what's in a word, but there's a lot in a word, even in your own language, when people have different understandings on one word. So
yeah.
Sometimes you even need to understand the word when you talk with someone about it. Otherwise, you're talking about different things.
It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. In fact, Linda's book group has been reading something in recent weeks. I don't know if you guys know this. Kathy, I think you've brought it before if you're still on the call. But it's about I think it's the 11 nations. Looks like Nations of North America. I'll tell you guys the actual book name in just a second. The 9 Nations of North America. You might also find it as American Nations, a history of the 11 rival regional cultures in North America. Let's see if I can tell you this book. Someone else did one about 9, but this is 11 nations. And it was written by Colin Woodward. Colin Woodward. Now, what makes this book, in fact, just one moment, everyone, chat amongst yourselves. I'm going to bring up the diagram. There you go. These are the American nations today, and there are 11 of them. What makes these interesting and what makes the book very interesting is that each of these areas of the US, not just the US, but North America, were settled by different cultures. And because those settlers brought their culture with them, these particular areas of the country were developed with very specific attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, traditions, etc. And many of those continue to impact behavior to this day. So here it is, what, 250
Interesting.
years later, and it's still going to hold true. Like, for example, of all of the nations that had, again, we're talking about these nations like Greater Appalachia, the Deep South, New France, etc. One of the questions was, how well did they get along with the indigenous population? Well, no one had a more harmonious relationship with indigenous populations than New France, because New France came, obviously these were French settlers, they came for one reason and one reason only. Why do you think the French originally came to the United States? Anyone know? Or to North America? Anyone know?
Needed space to
Mhm.
mix. I don't know.
It was based on the fur trade. They were furriers, fur. So they were looking for animal furs, whether it was going to be rabbit or otter or whatever it was. They knew that because of all the wilderness areas in the US, that those animal populations were very large, very robust, and so they came along. Well, New France, these French settlers very much adopted what the local culture was. And so there's a great kind of a merging of the cultures of the French cultures with the native populations of the First Nations of Canada and that. And again, for Dragon's benefit, in the US, we refer to people of our indigenous populations as being American Indians.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in Canada, they're referred to as First Nations.
Mhm.
So, but it's the same thing, the indigenous population already here. Where other populations came from across the seas, and they wanted to conquer the indigenous population. So, and a lot of that had to do with Yankeedom in particular, who kind of looked at the indigenous population as being less evolved, less whatever, etc. Now, an interesting one is New Netherland. Now, New Netherlands was quite small. It was basically just New York. Now, Dragon, have you visited New York City?
I have never been to the United States.
Oh, okay, well, if you go to New York, you're going to see Dutch words everywhere. So
Okay.
a lot of Dutch settlements, lots of the street names are Dutch, all that sort of stuff. And so, in fact, New York was originally going to be called New Amsterdam.
Yeah, I know.
And so there's a lot of that. Well, a lot of that culture still exists today. So, for example, one of the behaviors of people in that area of the United States can be characterized as they are very direct. They are viewed by outsiders sometimes as even being insensitive or rude.
Yeah,
They're not particularly polite. They tell you what they want to tell you. They have no hesitation to say it directly to your face. And for them, if you're in New York City, if you're in this particular area, totally normal behavior. Well, for
yes.
those of you who have not visited the Netherlands, the Dutch are also a very direct people. And just like the New Yorkers, the Dutch are not being rude. If anything, they believe that it is rude to not tell you the truth or to not. If you are overly polite, they're suspect. They're wondering, are you doubting our ability to handle the truth? So we learned when I was first doing business in the Netherlands that being overly diplomatic, being overly polite was actually going to be viewed suspiciously. So Dragon, is that still true in the Dutch culture?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you just got to be direct. And by the way, after everyone has been very direct with one another and just told one another whatever it is there was to say or hear, they all just kind of go like, all right, so are we going to lunch? Are we going to have a beer? What are we doing? You know, so for them, no offense is taken. If anything, the offense is caused by being overly polite. And so that to me is just another example of how a lot of these things that continue to exist culturally in the United States today were brought over from there. And so to Dragon's point about how words may change their meaning, I promise you things are viewed very differently in what the 11 nations would call New Netherlands. I mean, now here we are, I'm now living in El Norte. El Norte is actually northern Mexico. And you guys who have visited these areas of the US, so the southern part of Texas, the southern part of California, Arizona, New Mexico, etc. These are very, very much influenced by the Mexican culture specifically, not the Spanish culture, other than the degree to which the Mexican culture has been influenced by the Spanish culture.
This is very interesting.
It's
I was
fascinating.
called a Yankee before. When we first came to the United States, I lived in Connecticut, and I remember we drove all the way down to visit friends in Florida.
Yeah,
And
you're
the
a
people
Yankee.
in Florida said, "Yeah, you're a Yankee." And I was
You're a
like, "What the
Yankee.
hell is a Yankee?"
Yeah. A
But,
Yankee,
but,
one of the original
the,
colonists. Yeah, that's where you were. Yeah. Go ahead, Edie.
but what's interesting, they only consider that part of the country a Yankee because when I'm from Wisconsin, we were in the
Mhm.
war, but every Southerner will always say, "You're not a damn Yankee. You're from the Midwest."
That's
So
right.
it's very regionalized to New York, New
Eh,
Jersey, Connecticut.
That's
Yeah.
right. And they'll say to you that as you travel to the western areas of what they would consider Yankeedom, this is where people who arrived on the East Coast originally migrated west. And
Mhm.
so they carried a lot of that Yankeedom with it. But we can tell you that the culture of the Midwest is very different than the culture of the East Coast.
Right.
Mm.
Very
But
different.
you know what else, Kate? Um, you know, the Southerners, I mean, they don't like the people from there. And so, but the Southerners they have a tendency to be passive aggressive. You're not
Mhm,
honest, you're polite. And it's
mhm.
just polar opposite to what we're saying up there. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
it's
it
still
is.
there.
It's still there to this day, and that's why. And Linda could tell you more about this. I wish her microphone was working, but this is why a great deal of what we encounter today, culturally, attitudes about whatever happens to be going on the planet, it's very, very different, and it
Yeah.
has to do with whatever the original settlement behaviors were. So all these people, the far west, these were the people who were the pioneers who back during the land rush decided that they were going to, these are sturdy folk. And so they have a very different mindset. And, you know, we talk about something like even like gun awareness or gun laws in the United States. The mindset around guns in the far west continues to be very different than the mindset around guns elsewhere in the country. In the far west, they're saying like we're talking about living on thousands of acres of land that's filled with wildlife that we may want to eat or that may hurt us. And so the reasons why people out here might want guns may tend to be more about for hunting reasons and things like that, as opposed for personal defense, which might be more of the case if we're going to be on some of these other areas.
But
Having to be
nobody hunts with an MS-30 what's
well,
name
yeah,
or
it's
that,
like,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
that's what
exactly. It's
drives me nuts. But
yeah,
I
well,
want to
that's true,
say,
but
something else. Oh, I forgot it. But going back to the stuff we were talking about with language, this is interesting. There's a guy named Metulus. I just remember, I don't know the name of the book, but he helped mentally ill people by like teaching them, I think, Spanish, because padre didn't have the associations of father who may have
mm,
sexually molested you. So I find it interesting that if we change and learn a new language, our mental
absolutely.
health, our mental software gets
Right.
rebooted.
Well, and I think, you know, in support of what Edie's saying there, it's because when I was doing all my training in NLP, one of the things that we learned, well, very much central to NLP, is this idea about anchoring. Anchoring is when we attach feelings, emotions, beliefs, whatever, to a particular stimulant. Well, the most robust anchoring system we have is a language. And so when we hear a word, that word is not just what its definition is in the dictionary. That word to us is everything we've ever associated with that word. And depending on what your life experiences may be, you may have very different feelings and thoughts, reactions, responses to a particular word. And some of those words may actually be very big triggers for people,
Yeah.
things that would
So
bother them.
T, have you found that in your travels across the United States that these various areas have a different perspective of the word tension when you're doing your training? Like how do they embrace tension? Like some areas were more readily embraced it than others because of their perspective of tension?
It's not only their perspective of tension, it's their experience of tension. So for
Ah,
example, if I take someone from the left coast, way up here, the Pacific Northwest, even up into the Canadian areas of it, you take one of those people and you throw them into downtown Manhattan, I promise you,
mm,
they're going to detect or experience the level of tension inherent in the environment in a very different way. New Yorkers would not experience a walk in Manhattan as an upgrade experience.
mm.
But how many of us who will visit New York would kind of go like, it's the most tense place I've ever been? Well, because
Yes, it was.
there you go. Because our conditioning is very, very different. And you might think that Florida is a very mellow, laid back state, but you get to that coastline where you have Miami and Fort Lauderdale,
Mhm,
what they're referring to as like part of the Spanish Caribbean.
mhm,
That's a very different experience of tension because culturally, certain cultures tend to live more upgrid than other cultures do. And
mm,
for them, then you take that someone who is used to an upgrid environment culturally, you put them into a downgrid region, they're going to get bored very, very quickly because there's not enough to stimulate them for it to feel normal. And vice versa, you take someone from more of a downgrid environment and move them into an upgrid region, and you're going to watch them get totally anxious just
mhm,
because they're not used to that amount of stimulation so much. So yeah, moving from Metro Detroit to Charlotte was a culture shock, let me tell you,
mm,
because there are people that you meet in Charlotte, and Charlotte is probably one of the more vibrant cities there. Um, but you'd meet people and you go like, they are so slow, they have to speed up to stop. So I mean, they are so slow. Well, and then you head over to this area, you know, the southern part of Arizona, and you go like, oh no, Charlotte moved at lightning speed compared to what we routinely experience here.
But T, do you know that in this area, Mooresville has 70% implant? So the Southerners are
Well, that's true.
definitely the minority. So that's shifted.
Well, in fact, we
Really.
said when we lived in Charlotte, the rarest person for you to meet in Charlotte is a native Charlottean. So probably 90% of the population moved there as opposed to was born and raised there. And that, of course, is going to affect. And that's why one of the things that we said very, very early on is that it is very, very difficult to make friends in Charlotte. Because a
mm.
lot of the population is transient. They're there because of business purposes. But you try to make a friend with a native Charlottean, good luck to you, because they've got those deep South values. Relationships take a very long time. And I got to know about all of your family heritage. And I got to know about, you know, did you go to the cotillion and what side were you on in the Civil War? All that sort of thing.
Mm,
So it's all part of it.
interesting.
Okay, we've gone well over time, but if you guys find this interesting, maybe we can use one of our upcoming topics to be looking at these 11 nations and figuring out what's going on from a tension management perspective as we go from First Nation to New France and whatever. I'll see if I can find a nice little summary of the book. I'm sure Linda, well, she's read the thing. She can tell me if there's nice little summary definitions for each one of these areas, and maybe we could have a little bit of fun and
This would be
see.
interesting, I think, because I think about it for managing my own tension, having lived literally all around the world before coming to the United States. And I often wondered my, trek now from Florida to here in Washington, D.C. area. I always felt like I don't belong here, like it's too much
Yeah.
tension because
Yep.
everything's centered around the politics, and that's not my,
Yep.
I
Yep.
don't fancy it at all.
Yeah.
So,
So you basically moved from Spanish Caribbean up to Yankeedom.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe Tidewater. I think this is where we're going. Well, I got to find out where's DC. Nope, you're in Yankeedom.
Yeah. It's,
Hmm.
it's not my cup of tea at all.
Yeah. Hmm. Right, right on the border between Tidewater. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, we'll take a closer look at it. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining in. We will send out an announcement and give you guys a link to some stuff on the 11 nations. There. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye for now.